Welcome, business podcasters, to another episode of Podcasting and Professional Services. If this is your first time here, this podcast features stories of experts and professional service providers who have created a business impact through the power of podcasting. I'm your host, John Tyreman. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, leave a rating and review. Today's episode features Jason Mlicki and Jeff McKay, both co-hosts of the Rattle and Peddle podcast. On that show, they explore divergent thoughts on marketing and growing professional services firms. So chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you'll really like that show. I know I've been a listener for years. And I've had a few of these conversations, these podcast interviews with co-hosts of other podcasts. And my goal is to really capture the chemistry and the energy that they bring and give you an example of kind of the power of co-hosting a podcast. And I think that this interview is a great example of that. We talked about why Jason and Jeff decided to launch a podcast in the first place, how that came about. We talked about how their podcast has helped them each sharpen their point of view. We talked about how they each measure success, and they both look at that a little bit differently. So I thought that was really interesting. We spoke about their creative process and their approach to selecting episode topics, but then broader themes that they like to explore. So I thought that was an interesting perspective. And then we talked about their plans for where they want to take the show from here. So I think I think you'll find a lot of value in this conversation. But first, imagine you're able to build trust with buyers. Imagine you're able to rapidly accelerate your network growth and create endless content, all from just one activity. Well, that's the power of podcasting. And if you're ready to explore the idea of launching a podcast for your business, I'm offering a free podcast consultation. Simply go to redcedarmarketing.com or send me a message on LinkedIn to get in touch. All right, and here's my conversation with Jason and Jeff, co-hosts of Rattle and Peddle. Today, my guests are Jason Mlicki, principal of Rattleback, the marketing agency for professional services firms, and Jeff McKay, former CMO and founder of the strategy consultancy Prudent Pedal. Jason, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us, John. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited for having this conversation today. I've been looking forward to this. Been a follower of Rattle and Peddle for 5 or 6 years, I just would love to hear kind of like the origin story of Rattle and Peddle. Like, why start a podcast in the first place? How did this show come about? I guess, Jeff, let's start with you.
Oh boy.
I love this question, John.
What's that?
I'm curious to see how he answers this, John.
Oh gosh. Well, this is one of my favorite questions when I meet a married couple, right? Tell me your connection story. Ours, I really like how we came to be because our podcast was preceded by a relationship that started quite a few years before. I had just started Prudent Pedal. Jason was kind of repositioning Rattleback, and we both found ourselves at an association of management consulting firms meeting in Chicago. And it was kind of like a who's who of firms, Accenture, McKinsey, BCG, and some local firms. And Bob Boudet was presenting. And Jason stood up and asked a question, made a comment early on. And I was like, that was a good question.
Who the crap is that guy?
Yeah, who is that guy? And then I guess I stood up and asked a question. And Jason's like, hey, that was a good question. I wonder who that guy is. So at the break, I don't remember which one of us came up to the other first, but we're like, hey, and we jumped in on that question and just started a dialogue. And after we left that meeting, I don't know if Jason called me or I called him, but we end up calling each other like once a month. and just asking these big questions. Hey, I'm working with a client. I kind of got this. What do you think? Or we would just say, I saw something on social media and, this is weird. This is stupid. Why are people doing this? Right. And Jason said, man, I wish we had recorded that call after we had those calls. And that just became a popular refrain after we were having this conversation. Man, I wish we had recorded that because you said this. I need to remember that. So several years later, Jason called me. It was his idea to start the podcast and said, hey, let's just hit record on the conversations we were already having. Nice. And that started it.
It's funny. The one thing, I'll add one thing to this, and it's just that I actually remember exactly what Jeff said at that conference. It's really weird. So he stands up and he says, every professional services firm knows why their clients hire them, but they don't know how. And that was actually, I thought, a really insightful comment at the time. And I remember I thought to myself, I'm like, I didn't know he was a consultant. I was like, that's my next client. I'm going to go track this guy down. Because I'm thinking like he'd be a great client because he's thinking the right way. He's thinking about these kind of with like kind of open curiosity about like what's happening here. And so we started talking and like you said, the rest is history. So, and I agree. I think it's that's what has made Rattle and Pedal work, I think, is because it was a natural conversation that we were having all the time. And then all of a sudden it was just extending it into an audience and capturing sort of some of the things we've been talking about anyway. And then eventually, we'll get into this further, obviously the show morphed and changed over time as any show does. So
I like that. So you two kind of hit it off in terms of like a philosophical level and the way that you two kind of align in your thinking, and then having those conversations to just help each other out with your businesses kind of morphed into, hey, we should be recording this. And this was at a time, and this is 2018, 2017, kind of around then.
Yeah.
Podcasts were still relatively kind of nascent in their adoption. And so I think that was pretty forward thinking of you guys to have the wherewithal to kind of take that leap and record it and publish it on a new platform. And I was listening to your bicentennial episode, and Jason, you said something that kind of stood out when you were talking about some of the podcast episodes that you thought were going to do well or that should have done well but didn't match the top performing episodes. And you remarked that everyone's interested in hearing how to figure out what issues to build a thought leadership program kind of around, but when it comes to how you make those point of views compelling, there's less interest in kind of learning how to do that. And I thought that was really cool. And I guess that leads me into my next question. And Jason, we can start with you. From your perspective, would you say your podcast has helped sharpen your point of view or make it more compelling?
100%. So in fact, a compliment to Jeff. Jeff has helped sharpen my point of view on sort of like the world in general. He's helped shape my worldview a lot over the last 5 years in a good way. He's helped sharpen my point of view on specific business issues that clients have. But then actually, I know one of the things you asked me leading up to this is like, what do we want to get out of the podcast? Like, why do we do this? And for me, it's sort of like an R&D lab. It's like, I use it as a space to explore topics I don't always know a lot about. Sometimes I know nothing about the topic going in, and the guests come in and I'm learning from them. I'm like, I never thought about that. I never saw that before. So I kind of lost the thread of the question, but essentially for me, that's really what it's been all about, is just finding ways to, fill my curiosity on a regular basis around the things that I just don't know the answers to. And I've learned over time, having marketed in this professional services landscape now for going on 20 plus years, the volume of stuff I don't know is bigger than the volume of stuff I do know. It's just shocking how much more there is to learn and how much more that I'm just curious to learn about. So anyway, both Guess and Jeff, I think, have helped change that worldview dramatically.
It's kind of like an iron sharpens iron kind of thing. It's where you're taking an idea and you're kind of battle testing it between the two of you. And then, that may spark an idea to kind of refine your point of view, maybe on your blog or maybe in your talk, your speaking engagements and things like that. It's really interesting. Jeff,
100%.
I'd love to hear from you. What's your perspective on how the podcast has helped shape your own point of view?
When we first started, and our tagline still is Divergent Thoughts on Growing Professional Services, and our intro music has this kind of discordant sound to it. Those were very purposeful because when we first started out, Jason and I had very different views on the world. And that's what made the conversations so much fun. Is I was like, it would be kind of like that Saturday Night Live skit for people that are older than you, John. Jane, you ignorant slut, right?
Can't believe you would.
It's like, how can I even respond to what you just said? I mean, we used to like really butt heads a lot, and we got some feedback from our
that
listeners
could be entertaining.
about I really like that, and others we don't like that.
Don't like
you guys need to be nice to one another. But what's really cool about a partnership like we have is we both bring ideas and we beat them up before the show. I could not imagine doing the show on my own and being self-reliant, because I think the topics that we choose and the perspective on those are so much more robust because of Jason. I think it's been really cool to see how Jason has evolved since we started this. His point of view, and he's really authentic about how his point of view has evolved, which I think is cool because it shows humility and a commitment to learning. But I always say Jason is the talent of the show. Because he has this incredible ability to synthesize ideas and articulate them in a way that I don't. And I see how he has evolved, and I hate him. Every episode we get on, we hate because, like a great book, the protagonist in the story arc matures and changes. And I'm like, that's Jason. And I look at myself, I'm like, I'm doing the same damn stupid stuff that when it started. But Jason has really evolved, and his thinking has helped mine every bit as much as I've helped his.
Well, it's a good partnership. Hey, Jeff, can I tell him some of the titles for the podcast that we threw away?
Oh my gosh.
So we tried to name this thing.
Yeah. And Rattle and Pedal was not our first choice.
Okay, let's get into it.
A partnership requires a lot of compromise.
Yeah, there was literally hundreds of options that we brainstormed and we were thinking of, and we've actually seen some podcasts out there since that we like the names better. But anyway, my favorite one, this is the one I think you're gonna know I'm gonna go to, was we're gonna call it the Atheist and the Catholic.
Okay, there you go.
Because Jeff is convinced that because I'm not Catholic, I'm atheist, even though I'm not, just to be clear. But we always thought that would be kind of fun. But I think it was just because we had such just divergent worldviews. The one thing I will say real quick is, and I'll let you keep going. But you asked about production processes a little bit, and one thing I'll say about that, and we'll get to that later, but is that I think in terms of having a partnership, it because both of our careers are ebbing and flowing all the time, that's super helpful in terms of topic selection. I think that's actually been one of the greatest things, is that there are windows when Jeff's so busy, he doesn't really have a whole lot of time to think about the podcast. And so then I'm figuring out topics and identifying guests and working them. And then it shifts the other way. There's times when it's like, oh gosh, I'm so busy. And then he takes over. So I think it does help, both practically and philosophically on both levels. I think it's valuable. So.
Yeah, I do want to get into that, because I think it's really cool the way that, you've set up your show to where, some episodes are you two having a conversation. And then some episodes you do bring in a guest. And then there is a balance to that. And I think that offers diversity to your listeners. It's not just you interviewing guests over and over again. You're bringing both of your thoughts and perspectives and, divergent perspectives to the table. And I think that adds to the entertainment value of the show. So how do you balance that? Obviously, is it intentional to where you want to have a certain ratio of guest interviews to co-hosted commentary style? I guess Jeff or Jason, I guess who, do you guys have an opinion on that?
My sense is the topic drives the nature of the episode.
Okay.
If we're delving into a topic that is, an area of deep expertise for us, we may tackle it. Or if we feel we have deep expertise in this, but we think our listeners might benefit from some different perspectives, we'll get a guest. Or if we want to illustrate examples of our thinking that are real in the world, we might bring in a guest. But we just did an episode or a series on AI. And we're like, who has deep expertise on AI? It's so fledgling. We had no choice. Let's go out and find the best people we can on AI. So those were guests. But if we're talking about developing a point of view, thought leadership, marketing strategy, we just jump into those topics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say there's no specific ratio. We like to work in themes. So we try to work on, pick a theme and work it through 5 or 6 episodes until we get to a logical conclusion where we feel like we've found some new ground, uncovered some new insight or new thinking, that we shared a different way of looking at it. So for us, a lot of times that's the arc. I also like the themes to have opening and closings whenever possible. Okay. So we can say, we're going to talk about this for a little while, and here's what we think going into it. So we almost have a working hypothesis for the conversations we're going to have with the guests. And then a lot like a recap at the end. So it's like, okay, here's what we learned from all those people. We had them in, here's what they said. Here's what was interesting. Here's what, to your point, Jeff, changed my mind. I never thought about it that way. And I think that's a better way to think about it than I had prior. So I wouldn't say there's a rigid structure to that. In fact, I don't know if there's a rigid structure to anything that we do, really. I mean, would you agree with me, Jeff?
Well, when we started out, we gave some thought to the themes.
Yeah.
And I actually put a graphic together of a Venn diagram of the topics that I wanted to go after that reinforce the Prudent Pedal brand. And Jason put the topics he wanted to go after from a Rattleback brand. And we kind of parse those out in that Venn diagram because we have different buyers. I only work with managing partners and CEOs of firms, where Jason will do some of that, but he works often more with the marketing function. So they're somewhat different and different perspectives, and our audience kind of reflects that. And our subject matter, as a result, kind of flexes from a more executive view and a marketing view. But from what I've seen in our audience, the marketers that listen to our podcasts generally are much more strategic marketers, and they're on an executive trajectory. So we're able to kind of align those things.
I think that's a good mix of themes, though, because you get the executives who maybe it would benefit them to hear some of the more tactical marketing perspective, because that influences their high level thought, and then kind of vice versa, where you've got the marketers who, maybe they get tunnel vision in marketing world, but they need to see the bigger picture. And I think that kind of helps kind of reinforce, but like you said, Jeff, the growth trajectory of some of your listeners.
Yeah, no, very much so. I agree with everything you just said. I think, and And I think that's what we want. Actually, really,
Yeah.
we you know, for me anyway, I won't speak for Jeff on this, is that if someone comes to the show and they listen, and as a marketer, they become a better business person, then that's a
Yeah,
win.
totally.
If a business person and an executive leader comes in and they understand marketing better, that's a
Exactly.
win. You know, I think I would like both those parties to find value in the show as much as possible.
That's really cool. I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of how you both measure the success of the podcast and how that may have evolved over time. A lot of podcasters that I talk to, and when they first start out, they have certain goals that they want to hit. Maybe they're more vanity metrics or, certain downloads. They've got visions of monetizing the podcast, but then, later on in their journey, that changes and they realize that there's different kinds of business benefits of a podcast. So I'm curious, maybe Jeff, let's start with you. When you first started, how did you plan to measure success? And then how do you measure success today?
This is so funny. And we have all these historical documents because we cataloged all these. I mean, so we still have the list of names that we potentially use. We still have the metrics and whatever. My view of these metrics were so overstated and ambitious in terms of listeners and leads and revenue. And when Jason saw those, he just laughed at me. And rightfully so. Rightfully so. I was so ignorant of the hill you have to climb in doing a podcast. So I have softened those, and my metrics are really kind of quantitative and probably more qualitative. But I have, demand gen, and we kind of talked about that, right? We're putting our point of view out there and reinforcing our brands at the top of the funnel. We also use it for lead gen. I've gotten clients through this, all different kinds of clients, and they'll say, "Hey, I listened to your podcast," and they'll schedule a consultation or a meeting or something like that, which is great. But I think I use it so much more in the interactions I'm having with people. So I share episodes regularly with clients or potential clients that are wrestling with a problem. Say, "Hey, we talked about this subject. Here's perspective from two people. You can hear from a CEO or managing partner on how they looked at it." And that's invaluable to me because we have covered almost every issue I see in a business development situation, some form or other, and just say, "Hey, listen to this. It'll give you some insights. You can learn how we think, but if you don't want to talk to us, there's still something you're going to take away from that." And then the other thing, and I think this is really valuable, and John, I think you've talked about this on some of your episodes, is it's a great introduction tool to invite guests.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have had guests on. I can't imagine me picking up the phone and calling them and getting the time of day without the podcast. And that's what's been, I think, the best part of having the podcast is using it as an introduction to people that I want to meet or I want to talk to. Like Jason talked about, man, we just want to expand our thinking.
Yeah.
Come in and let's just talk. And I think that's the value for me.
Yeah, I like to say it unlocks conversations you wouldn't normally be able to have. Those are really good points, Jeff. And I like how your thinking has evolved over the years in terms of how you view the impact of the podcast on your business. Jason, I'd love to hear your perspective on how you first looked at measuring success and how that's changed.
Yeah, I mean, I never went into it with a huge lead gen target or goal. Like I never saw the podcast as a great means to that. I mean, Rattleback have a pretty robust inbound marketing platform that we built off of a blog over the course of a decade. So I went into it for a couple of things. One was, I wanted to get off the speaking circuit. I had been traveling a lot and speaking a lot, and I was really kind of worn out, and I wanted to be able to spend more time with my kids. And so I saw it as a way to do the speaking I had been doing, but do it from the comfort of my office versus flying all over the country. So that was one thing. So, and then the second thing was, again, the kind of the curiosity piece. And it started out as curiosity of like, how do you build a podcast? Like we'd never done it. So I wanted just to learn how to do it, kind of to see if there was a market there for us, for Rattleback, with our clients, what that might look like. And then eventually just to learn about everything that we've every topic we've covered, from culture to business development to you name it. I mean, everything you can think of, we've spent time on. For me, I think now when I think about the metrics that I think about and care about, I mean, yeah, you love it when an episode pops. That's obviously a great feeling when you have one that really spikes and you're like, wow, we really struck a chord there. But I think more than anything is, like Jeff said, I like it when I get messages back from listeners or messages back from clients, and they said they found value in the show. Because to me, what I've found is that it's like it enables me to have more conversations at scale, basically in utter simplicity. So it's like when they're listening, it's like they're part of the conversation, even if they're not in the conversation, and that's how they feel. And they tell me that's how they feel. So it makes me realize that it's giving me a chance to kind of share my perspective, with them on a regular basis, even if I don't have time to be with them on a regular basis.
I like that.
So that's, to me, probably the most valuable thing, is just the fact that I know that it's helping, as Jeff said, sort of build the brand and build a relationship with people that I may or may not know. And that's probably my biggest goal.
Yeah, that's a theme that I've heard in talking with prospects and clients, is they want to get out of the speaking circuit because it's just taking up too much of their time, and they want a better way to leverage their speaking skills. And a podcast is definitely a way to do that. That's really interesting. And then it's like you like you said, you're having those conversations at scale. I like the way that you phrased that, Jason.
So you're saying I'm not unique, my desire to get off the speaking circuit? I thought I was special, John. You're telling me I'm just like everybody else, every other guest.
I think we've all come to find the power of, like webinars and virtual presentations and networking groups and Zoom. That's become so mainstream now. And where it's so ingrained in our business culture that it's like, okay, why do in-person speaking? Why get on a jet and fly halfway across the country anymore? I'd love to get both of your perspectives. And Jason, let's start with you. Like, where do you plan to take Rattle and Peddle from here? What is the next 100 episodes, or what does the next year look like?
Well, that's not a hard question. I think, I don't want to say more of the same. I mean, obviously, I think we have to evolve, and we have to keep pushing the envelope. I mean, I'd like us to continue to try new things. I mean, about a year ago, we tested out a whole bunch of different formats. So we took topics and broke them down into 5 steps. We did headline breakdowns. We would take big news items in the news and break them down. I'd like to continue to do more of that, where we test new formats, test new approaches that take a different angle on what we're doing. And just seeing what works. I mean, we've never been rigid on our structure, and I don't want us to. In fact, we had a brief window in that testing phase, Jeff will attest to, where we tried to put structure on it. Well, we're going to do this type of episode, this week of the month. And every week we were going to do a different type of episode. And we tried it for about 3 months, and it felt really restrictive to us. And I just don't think it was working for us, because we just don't work that way. We're much more freeform thinkers. So, but yeah, I'd like to continue to grow the listenership, and I'd like to continue to explore big, meaty topics with interesting guests. I mean, I think the hallmarks of our show is that most of our guests are not people that many of them have never been on a podcast before, right? Like, this is their first foray into it. So virtually all of our guests are people that we personally extend offers to and invitations to and recruit.
Mhm.
Like nobody really comes at us from the other direction. In fact, we pretty much ignore and reject every single one of those. I think only once have we ever had a guest on that came to us through an inbound inquiry from a podcast, guest provider service or whatever. I pretty much just blatantly ignore all those and delete them. And so for us, it's just, again, continuing to have interesting conversations with interesting thinkers. I think for me, that's probably the biggest thing I'd like to see out of the next 100 episodes is just more of that.
Okay.
Jeff,
So
I don't know.
if
What do you
folks
think?
are listening to this, please don't pitch Jason and Jeff to be a guest.
Yes. There's not, you're just, and the ones that keep coming back for more and more and more. The ones that crack me up, John, I know you see these as well. It's like,
They-
they open with one kind of like semi-flattering sentence, and then it's a hard pitch, 3.5 paragraphs with bullets about this speaker. And I'm just like, oh my
And
gosh.
you can tell they
You
haven't
don't
listened
even
to the show. They don't know. I get those all the time.
Yeah. It just drives you crazy. It's like, well, what are you doing? Like this can't possibly be working. But
Wow. Well, Jeff, I'd love to hear from your perspective. How do you see the show evolving or growing? Jason, I love your point about experimentation and having that be like a big part of what you guys are doing. Jeff, is there anything that you'd add to that?
I would agree with the experimentation, and experimentation has gotten much easier for us over the years. In the first year or two, Jason came up with some harebrained ideas, and I was just like, "Man, that's just crazy. We're not
they got a lot of those.
doing that." Yeah. We have developed a level of trust where if Jason throws out an idea or I throw out an idea, we really don't go very deep on it. It's okay. Yeah, let's run with it. I don't see how it works. I don't see where it's going, but I trust you. We'll run with it. And that may start with a theme like we did a 3-part series on ESG, branding and marketing. And Jason was like, what the hell? I don't want to do this. I just don't want to do it, but I'll do it because he trusted me. And it ended up being one of our more popular episodes. And I think even Jason said in our bicentennial, I was surprised. We were ahead of the market on that one. And we just kind of developed that trust. So I think we'll experiment with ideas. The other area that I feel we need to move into, but we've been hesitant, is using video.
Yeah.
When we record the podcast, we use video with our guests and one another, but we don't produce the video. I think the market is evolving to the point, and particularly with AI and its impact on search, having a presence on YouTube, I think is going to be critical. The only reason we haven't done it is because I have a face for radio. And I'm just hesitant to be out there on video. So it's a confidence issue, not so much a production issue or anything like that. And it really is just a matter of pulling the switch on that.
I'm a big fan of video. At first, I was a little hesitant. I was more of an audio guy. Growing up, I recorded music in my parents' basement, much to their chagrin. And, I was a big audio guy. But then I found kind of the benefits of video. And one of the things that I've noticed is that, having the mere exposure effect of your face just being there on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and then people seeing your face over and over again, it builds trust, it builds familiarity with your face and your voice at the same time. And to your point, I think that is really critical because we live in a day where, executives can hire a ghostwriter. Executives can turn to AI to generate content that they can put on their social media on LinkedIn. And you don't really know if that's them or their thinking. But you can't fake that with a video or with a podcast. And so that's I'll get down from my soapbox. But yeah, video is important.
Hey, we are not above learning. So, stay up on that soapbox and educate us.
Well, that's my whole point. I want to bring different perspectives, different podcasts, how different people are running their shows, and what works, what doesn't, what experiments have been run. Jeff, Jason, thank you both so much for your time today, talking about your podcast, Rattle and Peddle. Folks that are listening, check out their show wherever you get your podcasts, and check out Prudent Pedal, check out Rattleback's website. And I just want to say thank you both for your time.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sean. I enjoyed it.
All right, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Jason and Jeff from Rattle and Peddle. If you found this episode insightful, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow along on LinkedIn. All right, happy podcasting.